You've probably seen it in movies, right? Millions of people suddenly vanishing from the earth, cars crashing, planes falling out of the sky. That's the pop culture image of the rapture. But behind that whole dramatic scene, there's a really deep historical mystery. So the big question is, where did this idea actually come from? I mean, is this an idea that Christians have always believed for the last 2,000 years? Or is it something much, much newer? That is the central question we're going to dig into, and we're going to do it by looking straight at the historical record. So the debate really boils down to this. On one side, you have the argument that the very specific idea of a pre-tribulation rapture was only really packaged and put together in the 1830s. But on the other side, you've got the claim that the basic ideas behind it, well, they're as old as Christianity itself. So which one is it? Okay, before we go any further, let's just get a key term out on the table. Eschatology. It sounds complicated, but it's really just the fancy theological word for the study of end times. And honestly, understanding the history of eschatology is the key to unlocking this entire debate. All right, let's start with the first side of the argument, the claim that what most of us think of as the rapture is actually a pretty modern invention. According to a lot of historians, the version of the rapture that you see everywhere in pop culture and a lot of churches is, when you look at the long arc of history, the new kid on the block. So around 1832, this theologian, Darby, comes along and really organizes these ideas into a whole system. He called it dispensational premillennialism, which, is a mouthful. It's basically a way of saying he saw history broken up into different eras or dispensations. And a huge piece of his system was this idea that the church would be raptured or just taken away before a final 7-year period of tribulation on earth. So from this point of view, this very specific, detailed system, it's only about 200 years old. But, that's only half the story. Let's flip over to the other side of the argument and see what clues might be hiding in the earliest Christian writings. I mean, did the ancient church fathers talk about anything that sounds even remotely like a rapture? Now, the folks who argue for an ancient rapture, they actually agree that Darby systematized the whole thing. But they'll tell you he didn't invent it out of thin air. They argue he was just connecting the dots on ideas that had been floating around for centuries. Okay, check this out. This quote is from a text called The Shepherd of Hermas, written way back in the early 2nd century. Just listen to the language. Escaped from great tribulation. The promise that it's possible for you to escape it. This idea of believers being saved out of a future time of intense suffering. Sound familiar? Now let's build on that. Here's a sermon from somewhere between the 4th and 7th centuries. This one is even more explicit. It says, the saints are gathered prior to the tribulation and are taken to the Lord for the specific reason that they won't have to witness the chaos. I mean, this isn't just some vague hope of escape. It's laying out a specific sequence of events. And this might just be the most powerful piece of evidence. This is from Irenaeus, writing around 180 AD. And his historical connection is just incredible. He was a student of Polycarp, who was a direct disciple of the Apostle John himself. And look what he writes. That the church is suddenly caught up, and it's after that that the Great Tribulation begins. He's clearly putting one event before the other. Okay, so how do we make sense of this? We've got these two seemingly contradictory lines of evidence. A modern system on one hand, and these ancient clues on the other. Well, to figure that out, we kind of need to zoom out and place all these ideas within the bigger history of Christian thought about the end times. First, one more key term for you: premillennialism. All this means is the belief that Christ's return happens pre or before a literal 1,000-year kingdom on earth. This idea is a foundational piece for a lot of the views we're about to look at. This timeline is absolutely crucial for seeing the whole picture. So the earliest view we have solid evidence for is historic premillennialism. This is what guys like Irenaeus believed. Christ comes back before a 1,000-year reign. Then, you fast forward to around 400 AD, and the super influential theologian Augustine popularizes amillennialism, the idea that the kingdom is spiritual and it's happening right now. Much later, around the 1650s, postmillennialism pops up, which teaches the church will bring in the kingdom. And finally, in 1832, we get Darby's system, dispensational premillennialism, which brings back the literal millennium, but adds that very distinct pre-tribulation rapture. Seeing it laid out like this helps you understand how different ideas have kind of ebbed and flowed over the centuries. And this brings us to a more nuanced take that really helps bring the two sides together. The argument goes like this. You have to separate the fully formed system from its individual components. The system itself might be pretty new, but the building blocks, the idea that Christ could return at any moment, the concept of believers escaping a final tribulation, those, they argue, are ancient. And this isn't some dusty old historical debate that's been settled. Scholars are actively arguing about this stuff right now, getting right down into the weeds of the original Greek words and the cultural context of the texts. For example, one major modern interpretation from the scholar N.T. Wright says that the whole caught up in the air language isn't meant to be taken literally. He compares it to this ancient custom where, if an emperor was visiting your city, the citizens would go out to meet him and then escort him back into the city as a welcoming party. So in this view, believers meet Christ in the air to welcome him back to earth, not to fly away to heaven. But of course, there's a strong rebuttal to that. Other scholars, like Michael Svigel, say that interpretation is flawed. They accuse Wright of misrepresenting the other side with caricatures, like nobody actually thinks it's about people just flying around on clouds. And crucially, they point out that even the earliest Christian writers who saw symbolic parallels in the Bible still understood the catching up to be a real, literal, physical event. So, after trekking through nearly 2,000 years of history, debates, and definitions, why does any of this actually matter today? I mean, what's the big takeaway from all this complexity? Well, it turns out your eschatology, your view of the end times, it isn't just some abstract theological trivia. It has real-world consequences for how you live your life, what you hope for, and how you engage with the world right now. Seriously, think about it. If you believe you have to somehow perfect the world before Christ can return, that could feel like an absolutely impossible burden. But on the flip side, if you believe you'll be zapped out of here before any real trouble starts, that might leave you totally unprepared for the hardships and suffering that life inevitably throws at all of us. The sources suggest that the earliest Christian view held this really interesting balance. Be sober, be watchful, be prepared for tough times, but don't check out from your responsibilities in the world today. So the rapture is not a simple idea with a simple history. It's this fascinating concept with ancient roots that was assembled into a modern system, and it's still being fiercely debated today. Knowing its long, complicated journey kind of forces us to ask a bigger question. What does it really mean to hold on to an idea, any idea, and how does its past end up shaping what it means for us, right here in the present?